What if I told you that everything you went through, every tear, every sleepless night, every moment you questioned yourself, wasn't just happening to you, but happening for you? What if from the very beginning God had a plan, and that plan included you walking into the life of someone who tried to break you? Now, I know that might not be what you want to hear. I know it's easier to believe that you were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, that you just happened to cross paths with someone who didn't deserve you. But let's be real. Nothing in this life is accidental. And that means neither was this. You were placed in that situation, in that relationship, in that storm for a reason. Not because God wanted you to suffer, but because he knew you could handle it. He knew you had the strength, the heart, the spirit to walk into the fire and come out refined, not destroyed. See, a narcissist doesn't pick just anybody. No, they seek out light. They seek out people who love deeply, people who give freely, people who see the best in others. Why? Because they need that light to survive. They feed off it. But what they don't realize, what they never see coming, is that some people cannot be broken. Some people, no matter how much they are used, lied to, manipulated, drained, some people still rise. And that's you. When you walked into their life, you weren't just another person to manipulate. You were a lesson, a test. You represented everything they were too afraid to become: honest, vulnerable, real. You showed them love, and in doing so, you held up a mirror, and when they looked into it, what they saw terrified them. Because next to your light, their darkness had nowhere to hide. And that's why they tried so hard to tear you down. That's why they belittled you, made you doubt yourself, played their games, because the only way they could feel powerful was by making you feel small. But here's what they didn't expect. They didn't expect you to wake up. They didn't expect you to see through the lies. They didn't expect you to outgrow them. And that's where they lost. Because the whole time they were trying to break you, God was building you. The whole time they were trying to make you feel weak, you were quietly becoming stronger. The whole time they were feeding off your energy, thinking they had the upper hand, they were actually setting you up for the greatest transformation of your life. You see, the enemy doesn't attack what isn't a threat. And if you were placed in the path of a narcissist, it means you carry something powerful, something they wanted, something they envied, something they could never truly take from you. And when it was all said and done, when the dust settled, when you finally walked away, you didn't just survive, you won, because you walked out wiser, you walked out stronger, you walked out knowing exactly who you are, what you deserve, and what you will never accept again. So was it painful? Yes. Was it unfair? Absolutely. But was it for nothing? Never. You were put in their life for a reason. You were the wake-up call they didn't want, the lesson they refused to learn, the presence they will never forget. And while they may never change, while they may continue on searching for another light to dim, you have changed. You have grown. And that is why you are successful. You see, God never wastes a battle. And if you've been through the fire, it's because you were meant to come out gold. Think about the way you loved them, the way you gave, the way you forgave, the way you showed up every single time, even when they didn't deserve it. You were patient when they were cruel. You were understanding when they were distant. You saw the best in them when they gave you every reason not to. And now you might be sitting here wondering, was any of it worth it? Let me tell you something. Your kindness was never wasted. See, people like that, people who manipulate, who take, who drain, deep down, they know exactly what they're doing. They know the difference between love and control. They know the difference between honesty and deception. And they know the difference between people who truly care and people who just play the game. They saw you, and for a moment, maybe just a flicker of a moment, they got a glimpse of something real. But here's the problem: real love requires truth, it requires vulnerability, it requires standing in front of someone stripped of all the masks and saying, "This is who I am." And that scared them to death, because a narcissist doesn't live in truth, they live in illusion. They build entire identities on what they want people to believe. And when you walked into their life with all that light, all that sincerity, all that raw, undeniable goodness, it was like shining a spotlight on everything they had been running from. You were a mirror. And when they looked into that mirror, they didn't just see you, they saw themselves. They saw their own emptiness. They saw the love they couldn't return. They saw the honesty they couldn't match. And instead of rising to meet you, instead of growing, instead of choosing change, they did what they always do. They ran. They lashed out. They tried to pull you down because it was easier to break the mirror than to face what it revealed. But here's what you need to understand. Their inability to love you the way you deserved was never about you. It was about them. It was about their limitations, their wounds, their fears. And that means your love was not a waste. It was a gift they were too broken to accept. And I know that might not bring you peace right away. It might not erase the hurt, because you weren't loving them with the expectation of being a lesson, of being a mirror. You were loving them because that's who you are. You were loving them because that's what your heart knows how to do. And it's easy to look back and think, I should have seen it sooner. I should have walked away earlier. I should have protected myself. But let me tell you something. Don't you ever regret having a good heart, because the world is full of people who are too afraid to love deeply, too afraid to give without conditions, too afraid to be open and vulnerable. That's not you, and it never will be. You see, the real tragedy isn't that they couldn't love you back. The real tragedy is them, because one day they're going to look back and they're going to realize that they had something rare, something pure, something real, and they let it slip through their fingers. Not because you weren't enough, but because they weren't ready. And when that day comes, it won't be your burden to carry, because you will have moved on. You will have healed. You will have taken that same love, that same light, and given it to people who deserve it, people who value it, people who know how to hold it with care. So, was your kindness wasted? No, it never is. Because love, real love, leaves an imprint, even on those who refuse to receive it. And while they may never admit it, while they may never change, you have. You have walked away knowing that you stayed true to yourself. And in the end, that is the greatest victory of all. Pain changes you, it stretches you, breaks you open, forces you to see yourself in ways you never had to before. And when you've been through something as deep, as consuming, as confusing as being with a narcissist, that pain, it doesn't just change you, it transforms you. I tell you what, Lou has you. In the beginning, it doesn't feel that way. At first, it just hurts. It's raw. It keeps you up at night, replaying conversations, questioning everything. You wonder how you let it happen, how you stayed as long as you did, how someone you gave so much to could treat you like you were nothing. And that's the hardest part, the nothingness they tried to leave you with. Because narcissists don't just take, they drain. They pull from you piece by piece until you look in the mirror and don't even recognize the person staring back. But here's what they didn't realize. You were never empty. They thought they took everything. They thought they won. But what they didn't know is that buried under all that pain, all that exhaustion, all that heartbreak, there was something they could never touch: your resilience, your spirit, your ability to rise, because the pain they inflicted, that became your catalyst. That became the thing that forced you to wake up, to see the patterns, to understand yourself in ways you never did before. You see, when everything is easy, when everything is comfortable, there's no need to grow. But when you've been broken, that's when the real work begins. That's when you start rebuilding not just who you were, but someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who no longer bends for people who don't deserve it. And that's the gift, isn't it? Not the hurt, not the betrayal, not the manipulation, but what it made you become. Because let's be real, you wouldn't be this version of yourself without that storm, without that fire, without that experience that made you look at yourself and say, I will never let this happen to me again. And that's not to say you needed that pain. No one needs to suffer to grow. But when suffering comes, and it will, you have a choice. You can let it define you, or you can let it refine you. You can sit in the bitterness of it, or you can use it to build yourself into something unstoppable, because that's what they never saw coming. They thought they were breaking you, but they were building you. They thought they were taking your power, but they were teaching you how to take it back. And now you stand taller. Now you see the red flags before they become regrets. Now you trust yourself in a way you never did before. And one day, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day you're going to wake up and realize that the person you are now, they don't even deserve to know you. That's when you'll understand. That's when it all makes sense. The pain wasn't for nothing. The struggle wasn't in vain. It was shaping you, preparing you, strengthening you for the life you actually deserve. Because when you've walked through fire and survived, you don't just go back to who you were. You evolve, you rise. And when that happens, when you step into the power of who you were meant to be, nothing and no one will ever be able to break you the same way again. They thought they were in control. They thought they had it all figured out. The games, the manipulation, the way they could twist reality to fit their version of the truth. They've been doing it for years, moving from one person to the next, never facing consequences, never being challenged, never being seen for who they really are. And then you came along. See, they expected you to be like the rest, another person to manipulate, another person to mold into their world where their needs come first and your feelings don't matter. But you weren't like the rest. You were different, not because you were naive, not because you were weak, but because you were real. You walked in with a heart full of love, with good intentions, with the kind of honesty that they had spent a lifetime avoiding. And that shook them to their core. You were a lesson they weren't ready to learn. Because for the first time, they had to come face to face with someone who wasn't playing the game, someone who wasn't pretending, someone who didn't need to wear a mask or manipulate to feel important. And that's the thing about narcissists. They build their entire identity around illusions. They craft a version of themselves that's charming, confident, untouchable, but it's not real. It's smoke and mirrors, and they know it. And that's why they surround themselves with people who won't question them, people who will feed the illusion. But you asked the questions. You saw the inconsistencies. You noticed the cracks in the story, the moments where the mask slipped, the times when the charm disappeared and the insecurity showed. And no matter how much they tried to twist things, no matter how much they tried to manipulate the narrative, you saw them. And that That scared them more than anything. Because the truth is, they never expected to be exposed. They never expected to have to look in that mirror. And what did they do when they realized they couldn't control you? When they realized you weren't going to shrink yourself to fit their world, they did what they always do. They blamed you. They made you the villain in their story. They twisted everything to make it seem like you were the problem, because accepting the truth about themselves, that was never an option. But here's what you need to understand. You weren't put in their life to save them. You weren't put there to fix them, to heal them, to make them finally see the light. No, that was never your job. Your job was simply to be you, to be the truth in a world they built on lies, to be the one thing they couldn't manipulate, the one person they couldn't fully control. And whether they ever admit it or not, you left an imprint. Maybe they'll go their whole life refusing to change. Maybe they'll never acknowledge the impact you had. But that's not your burden to carry, because the real victory, the real success, it's in the fact that you saw the truth and walked away. That you refused to be another person in their cycle. That you refused to betray yourself just to keep their illusion alive. And that's why, in the end, you weren't just another person in their story. You were the lesson, the moment that could have changed them if they had been ready. The one that got away, not because you weren't enough, but because they weren't willing to grow. And that's something they'll have to live with for the rest of their life. There comes a moment after everything, after the storm, after the heartbreak, after the confusion, when you finally sit with yourself and ask, who am I now? Because let's be honest, the person you were before, the one who walked into that relationship, into that situation, into that battle, that person doesn't exist anymore. At first, that realization hurts, because you remember who you used to be. You remember the way you loved, the way you trusted, the way you gave without hesitation. And now you're more cautious. Now you second guess things. Now you carry the weight of everything you've been through. And maybe, just maybe, a part of you wonders if that means they won. If they succeeded in changing you. If they managed to take something from you that you'll never get back. But let me tell you something. They didn't take anything. They didn't win. They didn't break you. They woke you up. See, before all of this, you loved blindly. You trusted without question. You gave without thinking about whether or not it was being reciprocated. And that wasn't a flaw. That was who you are. But what this experience taught you, what this pain forced you to learn, is that love without boundaries isn't love, it's self-sacrifice. And trust without discernment isn't trust. It's vulnerability in the hands of the wrong person. That's the difference between who you were then and who you are now. Now you see things clearly. Now you recognize the red flags that you used to ignore. Now you understand that love is not about how much you can endure, how much you can prove, how much you can fix in another person. Love is about mutual respect. Love is about two people meeting each other at the same level, not one person constantly lowering themselves to keep the other comfortable. And that strength, that wisdom, that self-respect, that's your victory. Because what they wanted was for you to leave this experience bitter, broken, afraid to love again. They wanted you to carry the pain like a weight that would keep you from ever trying again, ever trusting again, ever living again. But that's not who you are. That's not how this story ends. Because the truth is, you didn't just survive them, you grew because of them. And now you get to move forward knowing that the love you have to give, it's not for just anybody. Your time, your energy, your heart, that's valuable, and not everyone deserves access to it. So, no, you're not the same person you were before. You're better, you're stronger, you're wiser. And while you may still be healing, while you may still have moments where the past sneaks up on you, you are no longer that person who didn't know their worth. And that's the greatest success of all. Because while they are still trapped in the same cycle, playing the same games, making the same excuses, you are free. You walked away with clarity, with power, with a lesson that will serve you for the rest of your life. So when you ask yourself, who am I now? Know this: you are someone who made it through. You are someone who refused to be broken. You are someone who is stepping into a future where love will never feel like a battle again. And that is something no one can ever take away from you. There comes a time when you stop looking back, not because you've forgotten, not because it didn't matter, but because you've outgrown it. Because at some point, you realize that everything you went through, everything you endured, everything that broke you, shaped you into the person standing here today. And that person is no longer attached to the pain. You see, for a long time, the hurt lingers. It shows up in unexpected moments, a song, a place, a memory. And suddenly you feel it all over again. The way they made you question yourself, the way they twisted the truth, the way they convinced you that love meant sacrifice, that loyalty meant suffering, that your worth was something they had the power to define. But that was never love. That was never real. Real love doesn't leave you depleted. Real love doesn't require you to abandon yourself just to keep it alive. And when you finally step back, when you finally see it for what it was, you start to understand what you lost was never love. What you lost was the illusion of love. And what you gained, that's something far greater. You gained clarity, you gained wisdom, you gained freedom. And that freedom, that's where your power is. Because you are no longer seeking validation from someone who was never capable of giving it. You are no longer measuring your worth through the eyes of someone who couldn't even see their own reflection clearly. You are no longer waiting for closure from someone who was never honest enough to give it. Because closure isn't something they can give you. It's something you give yourself. It happens the moment you decide to stop waiting for an apology that will never come. The moment you stop replaying the past, hoping for a different ending. The moment you stop wondering if they ever really cared, if they ever really felt anything, if they ever look back and regret what they lost. It doesn't matter, because their lesson in your life is over. The chapter is closed. And now your only job is to move forward, caring only what serves you. And I know sometimes it's tempting to hold on to the anger, to want justice, to want them to feel what they made you feel. But let me tell you something. Life has a way of making people face themselves. You don't have to be the one to do it. You don't have to chase revenge or wait for karma to come knocking. Life will teach them in ways you never could. And while they're stuck in their same cycle, repeating the same patterns, making the same mistakes, you will be living, you will be thriving, you will be walking in the kind of peace that only comes from knowing that you made it out, that you learned, that you rose above what was meant to destroy you. So when you think about them, let it be with gratitude, not for what they did, but for what you became because of it. Let it be with a quiet understanding that their part in your story is done. And let it be with the unwavering certainty that the best of your life is still ahead of you. Because that's what healing is. Not pretending it never happened, not denying the pain, but choosing every single day to no longer let it define you. And when you finally reach that place, when you finally look at yourself and see nothing but strength, nothing but wisdom, nothing but you, That's when you'll know you won.